Hey, welcome everyone. This is our very first wellness series, and very fortunate to have Lisa Smith here with us tonight. And I'm going to introduce her, and she's also a client. Recently, well, probably in the past year, moved from New York to Del Mar. So it's been a great friendship, and I'm so glad that she volunteered. She said she was willing to do this. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So here we go. So Lisa is a former practicing lawyer and law firm executive, as well as a certified professional recovering coach, writer, speaker, and podcast host. She consults with legal employers and other organizations to break the stigma around substance use and mental health disorders and to promote employee well-being. Prior to beginning her more than 20-year legal administration career, Lisa practiced law in a corporate finance group of a global firm. She most recently served for more than 5 years as a deputy executive director of a New York City firm. Lisa is the author of Girls Walk Out of a Bar, her award-winning memoir of high-functioning addiction and recovery in the world of New York City corporate law. She co-hosts the podcast Recovery Rocks. She has appeared on the Today Show, BBC World News, the Fox News discussing these issues. Her writing has been published in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, Women's Health, and many others. Now, let's welcome Lisa. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Linda, for having me. And thank you for doing this whole series. It's so important right now. This is, there are so many people struggling with so many issues right now. It is really important that we talk openly about these kinds of subjects and our mental health and how to take care of ourselves. I thought I would give you a little bit of background of my story because a lot of the tools that I learned in recovery are the tools that I am using now to deal with the experiences we're going through with lockdown and with all the uncertainty around and all of that. So I will start at sort of the bottom of my story. So the morning in 2004, the morning that I decided to check myself into a detox, my breakfast that day had been most of a bottle of red wine, a few big lines of cocaine, and that had been the norm at that time for me at that point. That was the end of the final 18 months of my using. I checked I had this mirror that I used. I was working in a law firm in Midtown, and I was on the administrative side by then. I had been a practicing lawyer and had jumped to the administrative side when I felt like I couldn't take on additional responsibility with the way I was drinking at that point, and stayed on at the firm in an administrative role instead. So the way I would go out to work, this is several years later, right when I was getting sober, was I had a mirror next to my door of my apartment in New York City. And I would look in the mirror and I would check my mouth, my teeth for lipstick. And then I would check my nose to see if I had any blood or any cocaine coming out of it. And then I went and walked out the door, picked up my New York Times, had my laptop and in my other hand, and was getting ready to go to another day at work. It was Monday morning. And on that day, what I felt going out that door was sick, physically sick, afraid, very afraid, and completely alone. I thought I was the only one. I now know that I am far from the only one. It is a really prevalent thing among lawyers, but it is out there, both substance abuse and mental health disorders. But for so long, and I do feel like this is changing now, but for so long, it wasn't talked about because there's fear, there's shame, there's stigma all associated with it. And therefore, people who are struggling tend to keep it behind closed doors and not reach out. So at that point in 2004, I was on the back end of what had been basically a dozen-year spiral down in my drinking and drug use. I went from being what I considered a nightly drinker to becoming, or what I consider a social drinker, to becoming a nightly drinker. And, but it was okay. I was always doing great at work. I never even got so much as a negative performance review. And, I would say, yeah, maybe it's a little weird that I drink on nights even when I'm alone, but, I got this really stressful job and there's all this stuff going on. And it's really okay. It's not like I'm somebody who drinks at lunch. And then I found the people who like to drink at lunch a few years down the road. This is all over a course of 12 years. I always say that alcoholism is not contagious, but it does run in packs. You tend to find your people, right? So I found people that drank at lunch, and I thought, it's really not so bad that I drink at lunch, because, people in France drink at lunch, and, Americans are just way too uptight about this stuff. It's, they really need to relax. And definitely I'm not one of those people who drinks in the morning, because if you drink in the morning, then you're really bad. Then you're no longer, I knew I was an alcoholic for many years, or for several years, but I consider myself a high functioning alcoholic. I was doing great at work. I had the nice apartment, a ton of friends, family, all of that. So what could be wrong with this picture, right? I was high functioning until the day came in 2000, or it was in 2003 that the day came that I woke up, and I had a job at that point where I could work remotely a lot. I was the director of client development at a big law firm, but it wasn't based in New York, and I didn't have a boss in New York. So I tended to work home a lot. And I woke up one day in 2003 with the worst hangover I had ever had. It was like my head against a bed of nails and my stomach sick. And by that point, this was basically 10, 11 years in. I would shake all the time until, if I couldn't drink, I would always hide my hands under the desk at work so nobody could see them. I would wake up very sick in the morning, and I knew I was physically addicted. And so that morning I actually had to be in a meeting in the office. My boss was in town from Denver, and I couldn't work from home that day. I couldn't not go to this 10 o'clock meeting. And I knew, as sick as I was, that there was no way I was going to be able to get myself to that meeting without having a drink. I knew that was the only thing that was going to kill the headache, kill my tremors, kill all of that. And I remember thinking, as I pulled the bottle out of the refrigerator and went to take a drink, and it was like, 8 a.m. And I thought, you know what, this is really bad. This is okay. Now we're really in that territory. I said, but I can get this under control. I can get that. Why wouldn't I think I could get this under control? I'm not going to start drinking in the morning all the time. I had gotten everything else in my life under control. I did well in college. I went to Northwestern. I came home. I went to law school. I was on the law review. I graduated at the top of my class. I got, the job in New York. And I just thought, I'll get this under control like I do everything else. And the answer is no. When you're at that point, you can't get it under control yourself. And instead, what I ended up doing was adding cocaine into that whole mix. That's how the cocaine got in there, because what it would do is counterbalance the effects of the alcohol, which would, when I had to start drinking in the morning, I'd be kind of slurry and drowsy, and I would need to sort of straighten up to get into the office. And I hope none of you are familiar with this particularly awful dynamic, but if you use some cocaine at that point, it wakes you back up. So like, if you saw me in that last 18 months, if you saw me, and when I first kind of came to in the morning, you would look at me and you'd be like, oh my gosh, that's a very sick person, soaked in sweat, tremors, just ill, pasty looking. And then if you saw me like a couple hours later, after I had calibrated and gotten everything going and calmed everything down, you'd be like, oh, hey, Lisa, how you doing? Like that. I had to do that to maintain normal. That was normal. And it is a miserable, heinous way to live. And going down that entire spiral, there's also this parallel spiral. And this is what comes into play, I think, a lot with what we're going through now. There's a parallel spiral that happens of, you know, you have some denial, but that denial is very much mixed with fear, with what I don't know what I would do. How can I stop drinking? All my friends drink. I have to drink when I'm out with clients. I have to, you know, I can't imagine a life without drinking. So you have fear of what's on the other side. You have fear of being found out that this is going on. The shame is almost indescribable to me. It took, by the time I was done, I had no self-esteem left. None. I mean, I worked with amazing people and I loved them. And when I had to be in the office, I was very focused. And if any of them knew, I just felt like they would think so little of me. I'm learning that that's not so much the case. So that kind of, and isolation is the other piece of this mix that is really certainly very relevant here in this situation, because we are all experiencing a lot of isolation. So just, you know, a little bit more about my background. I grew up in New Jersey in a great family. My dad was a judge. My mom was a teacher. There were a lot of lawyers in my extended family, sort of up and down. And there was also, I learned, a history of alcoholism and mental health disorders up and down the family. So with that, you know, if you meet people in recovery, you're almost guaranteed that they will have a similar story, that somewhere in their family, I mean, there are people who don't, but it's very likely that somewhere in their family, this occurred, and it's believed to have a genetic component. So, I went through, I always felt like a kind of off kid. I was always really gloomy, sad, very fearful. And, you know, but I rolled along in school. I started drinking early, young, when, you know, kind of, I was like the first kid for peer pressure, like, sign me up, I'm in. Because I found early that what alcohol did was it smoothed over all those fears and all that insecurity and all that, all those kinds of feelings that were, the sadness went away for a while. And so I, you know, like I said, found people all along to drink with, and who didn't. And most importantly, I had my first blackouts when I was in high school. But my friends had blackouts too. So, you know, it was never something, and certainly in college and in law school, it was like that. So it was never something where I was hanging around with people who were like, Lisa, like, what happened last night? You were so, you know, drunk and you don't remember where you were. And I was hanging around with the people who thought, like, yeah, that's kind of funny. Like, I don't know who parked the car last night. And it's not funny. But that was how I was able to tell myself this isn't that big of a deal. You know, people drink like me. And it was all going fine until I won the big prize, right, which was a job right out of law school. I got a job as an associate at a big law firm in the city. And it was when I was a first year associate that I started drinking nightly, that it really became that kind of thing. So the spiral downward literally started the first year I started practicing law in New York. And it just kind of, as I said, kind of took on a life of its own. And I felt compelled, you know, it inches up on you, and I felt very compelled to keep hiding it. And so, you know, my friends and my family, they weren't really seeing what was going on, because, you know, I would go out to dinner with my friends and we'd all have some drinks at dinner and then they'd go home. You know, I was in my late 30s at this point. Like, you know, people had kids, people had whatever. What they didn't see was me then go home and pull out another bottle and drink it by myself. My family had gotten very used to me. They were in New Jersey. And, you know, when I would say I'm coming out on the weekend, I'm coming to visit, they were very used to me just calling at the last minute and being like, you know what, I got to work. I can't go. Like, it's very common for, you know, lawyers to have those kinds of last minute things. And so, you know, for them on the outside, I was still doing well. So why would they think anything was wrong? You know, I was just a stressed out person, and yeah, I drank too much. you know, when we would all be out. But, you know, beyond that, they didn't know what was going on. So that morning, fast forward to the morning in April of 2004, that I went out to that, you know, went out the door as I described in the morning. And I went to the elevator to go to, you know, downstairs. And on my way to the elevator, I had this and it was a Monday morning. I'd been up like all weekend. I had this overwhelming feeling came over me. And I thought I either had overdosed or that I was having a heart attack. I know now that what I had was a panic attack. And it's crazy. But in that moment, all of the mornings that I had woken up before, opening my eyes and thinking, another day. I wish I didn't open my eyes. Something in that moment when I actually thought I was going to die, I was like, wait, I don't want to do that. I need help. I knew how physically addicted I was. Of course, I'd been reading about things like this. So I knew that I needed, if I was going to do something, I knew I was going to need to go to a hospital to have a medicated detox. I couldn't just like stop drinking cold turkey. When you're that physically addicted, if you stop cold turkey, you can have blood pressure spikes that you actually do have a heart attack and things like that. So you need to be in a hospital setting, supervised, medicated. I didn't know what to do. I had no sober references in my life. I knew no one sober. I knew no one, you know, I had no one to call, no one to talk to. I was terrified. I called my doctor because I thought, well, I got to figure out where to go. And he was like, oh, you don't need to go to detox. I saw you a couple months ago. Your bloods are fine. And I told him like 3 facts about my life. And he said, that's it. You're going inpatient. You're going today. But he didn't, you know, we were looking up where my insurance would take me. I wanted to stay in Manhattan for some reason. And I ended up, this place had a bed. And so I was like, great, this place has a bed. It sounds good. It's in a nice neighborhood, whatever. I'll go there. I now know that that place had a bed because it was the worst psych hospital in the city. And I was in the worst lockdown detox unit. And I had to sign myself in on a 72-hour psych hold in order to be treated. And I found out the hard way that it was not. I should have done my research. The moral of that story is don't ask your gastroenterologist where to go to detox because they don't know. But I ended up staying for the 5 days. And before I went, you know, that morning, the first thing I did, it wasn't call my family, which I did later, my friends and all of that, and say what's going on. The first thing I did was open my laptop and email my law firm and say, listen, I worked almost exclusively with partners. So I wrote to the partners and I wrote to the team members, people below me, and said, I had a medical emergency this weekend. I'm in the hospital, but I'm fine. Please don't worry about me. I'm going to be out of touch because I have to be here this week. But again, I'm perfectly fine. Please don't worry. See you next Monday. I knew that under the privacy laws, I could check into, or I knew under the privacy laws, I could be out sick for 5 days without having to tell them why or explain myself. But I knew that if I was out on that 6th day, that I would need a note from a doctor. And I was not willing to do that. I was afraid that, you know, they wanted me to go to a 30-day rehab after I was detoxed. Then you go to rehab to learn how to, you know, deal with life sober. And I refused to do it because I was afraid that my coworkers who would see me on Friday and, you know, thought of me as a capable, reliable, smart member of the team would see me after a month later, and somehow they would have found out where I was, which is not right. And that they would then view me as, you know, somehow defective or weak, possibly amoral, definitely not reliable. And that would change everything. So I wasn't willing to tell them. I agreed to go to an intense outpatient program 2 nights a week. And I started immediately going to 12-step meetings. I still do that today. I still go to 12-step meetings. I just went straight back. I don't recommend it. it is really important, I think, to take all the time that you can if you're dealing with that kind of an issue, and not to feel like it's something that you can't do. So basically what happened to me, I see, is like was sort of like this continuous line. So I had this genetic predisposition towards these issues, and towards alcoholism. I didn't know, and I found out, through talking to the psychiatrist in the hospital I was in for detox. He diagnosed me. He said, listen, you're a smart woman with a very serious problem, and if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die. You have crossed a line beyond which you can drink safely, and you're going to have to not drink anymore. You have to stop drinking. And he said, I think that your drinking has been, and really it goes all the way back to when I was a kid and the way I used food. Food was really the first substance I abused. And he said, I'm going to but I think you've been medicating an underlying major depressive disorder and an anxiety disorder. And that stops now. And we're going to get you on a prescription. You're going to take antidepressants, and you're going to go to therapy, and you're going to do all the, do the recovery thing, and that the antidepressants hopefully will recalibrate your brain so that you don't feel so compelled to drink. So I was incredibly fortunate that he got my diagnosis right. It's very difficult to get a correct diagnosis on the first try of a mental health issue. And I was incredibly fortunate that the medication he put me on worked. That's also incredibly difficult to get a prescription that works the first time out. And, that was basically what I went out into the world with. Once I realized between the genetics and the underlying mental health thing that may also have a genetic component, once I combined that with the crazy life of a junior associate at a big law firm, and exhausting and stressful, and it was too much. And that's when the addiction took over. So, you see sort of the bases of this being in genetics also, and in it's really what it is. Addiction and mental health disorders are diseases of the brain, the same way that other diseases are diseases of the body. The brain is an organ in our body, just like our heart is an organ in the body. If you have cardiac disease, you go to a cardiologist. If I had diabetes, I would go to a doctor who specializes in this stuff, in diabetes. I would take medication that doctor prescribed to me as directed, and I would make the lifestyle changes that doctor recommended. So that might mean diet, exercise, various things to stay healthy. I have a brain disorder, a brain disease that is just like any other organ in the body. I go to a doctor, a psychiatrist who, diagnoses it and prescribes medication. I take that medication as directed all along, and I make the lifestyle changes that need to be made to keep my disorder in check. So those lifestyle changes, again, diet, exercise, I go to recovery meetings, I do other things, the things to keep me on track. So really we have to, stop treating these as two different kinds of health issues. Physical health and mental health are all health issues. And, for years I thought I could get it under control and I could handle it, and I could not. And really it's not something to be handled without, at least support of a community and, if necessary, the right doctors. We can't do this alone. So I'm going to switch now to sort of talk about the current situation. So for those of us who have struggled in the past with addiction, and just, to be clear, I worked really hard at recovery, and I did not have a relapse. So I celebrated 16 years sober in April. But it's only because of following the things my doctor told me. And for people who've grappled with these issues before, this particular time brings up some very tricky issues. And it's the case for all of us as well. So uncertainty, for one, right? There is a lot of stress on our bodies, physical stress. And we tend to get into fear and think about worst case scenarios. And, you know, it is just not clear what's going to happen. And that, you know, is something that can cause people to seek, either to seek to self-medicate or to fall further into a mental health disorder. Many of us, and I know Linda is one of these highly driven people, and we're often perfectionists. People in recovery are often perfectionists, and a lot of us are perfectionists. And we don't just want to control what happens, you know, in the next 6 months or the next month. We want to be able to do everything perfectly today, in the next 10 minutes, in the next whatever, going forward. And that is just something that is a real challenge for perfectionists. We are having to adopt new routines. I like to compare it to if you took a snow globe and you shake up the snow globe and then you set it down. It's like our snow globe has been totally shaken right now. There are new routines. We have to adapt to all different kinds of things, literally in just about every aspect of our life. And that is a challenge. We are also, I think, so many of us, and I saw this written, and I thought it was put so well in the Harvard Business Review, that there was an article that they had that said basically like that nagging feeling you can't quite identify right now, that sort of low-level anxiety that's hanging out, that there's a huge component of grief going on. We are grieving our lives as we worked for them and set them up and as we knew them. We are grieving, you know, I recently moved to Del Mar. My mother is in New Jersey, and I was going home once a month to spend days with, you know, a few days with her. I don't know when I'm going to be able to do that again. I'm grieving the loss of that time with my mother. She is grieving not being able to be with me. All of the little things, we can be grieving, you know, the trip I took to the supermarket today, walking around with a mask on my face, like it's a dystopian reality we're in. And, you know, there's grief for just being able to go out, you know, and not worry about getting sick or making someone else sick, or just sit at a table and be with friends. We're social creatures. And that is, grieving that is certainly a big thing. Isolation, as I mentioned, is huge. And it has been, and I do a lot of, in my recovery coaching, I lead some meetings for a group called She Recovers, which is great. And if anybody is looking for any kind of groups or support or anything like that, please contact me after and I'll hook you up. There's so many great free resources out there right now and people supporting each other the way they can online. But there is so many people who are checking into these meetings and, you know, connecting. You can do it anonymously, totally, but they're alone in their apartments, and they've been alone, or their homes, or wherever it is, and they're isolated. And for me, isolation looks like, what isolation triggers in me is the end of my drinking, right? So on a Friday, if I had to go into the office for a few hours, my perfect setup would be get home in time to have the drug dealer come over early, late afternoon, have all my vodka, all my wine in place, have like 3 packs of cigarettes. I don't smoke anymore. And like just bolt the door for the weekend, pull the shades, and not go out and not interact with anybody. So being isolated, being told you can't go out, is very triggering to me, because that's like recreating the circumstances of when I used to use. So that is, that's a big one. So some strategies to address some of these issues and all of that going on. First and foremost, if you don't feel okay, it's okay. It is okay to not feel okay in a global pandemic with all that's going on in the economy and all that's going on in our society. All of these things, it is okay not to be okay. There are a lot of people not okay right now. And, you know, it's okay for someone else to be not okay. And like I said, there's a ton of people to connect with and ways to address it, but accept it. You know, we tend to be so hard on ourselves. We are so much harder on ourselves than we would be to a friend. You know, if I spoke to a friend the way I speak to myself in my head sometimes, I would be horrified. And we have to say, you know, we're doing our best here, and that's good. There is no medal of valor in toughing it out or getting it under control in this situation. And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, but it really helps. And, you know, the fear of stigma, I think, has come a very long way. You know, when I got sober, like I said, it was 16 years ago. It was not discussed in the workplace. It was not, in big law firms, you might talk about somebody who drank too much, but you go, yeah, that's, you know, that person's personal life, and we don't get involved. He gets his work done, and so it's all fine. I never heard words like depression, mental health, anxiety in the law firm. Now, and I know a lot of organizations, because I spoke to Google, I spoke to lawyers at Google last week, and they have whole wellness programs, and we're all talking about mental health, all of these issues. And, you know, it is being forced. My view has been over the last few years is that the conversation's been forced because the new generation of lawyers, of people at Google, of people wherever, the new generation of adults moving into positions of power in this society grew up with those terms. They grew up being fluent in things like, you know, feeling depressed, feeling not okay, feeling anxious. So that, you know, and then basically when you look at a lot of substance abuse is just sort of the layer on top of it as the way that people are addressing it when they're not addressing it in a healthier way. You know, they're ready to have this conversation. And, you know, it's interesting talking about stigma. I'll tell one quick story. So when I got my book deal, it was 2015, and I had just been promoted to deputy executive director of the law firm I was at, and that gave me a seat on the firm's management committee. So that was like me, the executive director, and like 7 of the most powerful partners in the firm. And we met every Wednesday, and it was a very, you know, I sat at the front of these full partnership lunches. It was a big role. And I had just been promoted, and people knew, and partners at the firm, I'd been there for 10 years. They knew me, but they didn't know my story. Like some that I was friends with, I had shared it with over time, but it wasn't common knowledge at all. And so I went, people knew I wrote, basically. And it's funny, when you tell people you write, they say, oh, what are you writing? And I say, well, it's memoir. It's actually about a time, you know, that I had a big challenge in life and how I dealt with it, and I think it could help others. And people would be like, oh, okay, like, don't tell me anymore. That's enough. And so people didn't really know what I was writing about. So I had to go to the firm and say to the senior partners, sort of one by one, and I'd knock on a door and I would say, hey, you might have heard, I got a book deal, my book's going to come out. And they would be like, yeah, that's great news. And I would shut the door and I'd be like, now let me tell you what it's about. And I would be so nervous, and I'd be getting my story out, and but I was really high functioning, and I never got arrested, and blah, blah, blah. I'd be making all these things to talk about what I went through. And I have to say, like over 80% of the time, I would say what I was saying, and I wouldn't even get through my story, and they would interrupt me, and they would say, oh, you know, my law school roommate, my cousin, you know, my, you know, neighbor down the street. And they weren't saying it in a way to be like, oh, yeah, that, you know, that's okay, Lisa. We know people have that thing. They were saying, because they were identifying with it because they had questions. They wanted to talk about it. It would be like, you know, my uncle, it was in the fall, my uncle's coming over for Thanksgiving and he just quit drinking. Like, should I not have alcohol at the Thanksgiving table? Or, you know, I have this friend who I think has a problem. How do you talk to somebody? I realized that not only were they ready to talk about it, open to talking about it, and this was in 2015, they had questions. Like, they wanted to discuss this. So I think when we think about stigma, don't be deterred by stigma in reaching out for help. That doesn't mean you have to scream from the rooftops like I do about it, because it's an extremely personal thing. And you are absolutely, no one is entitled to know your story. You are absolutely entitled to ask for help wherever you ask for it, and keep it to yourself. but it is something that you're not alone in, and that is really important. So one of the strategies that I think a lot of people are now falling into sort of, seeing some declines in mental health or some upticks in substance use, and, or I am asked, how do I know? Like, what if I'm, how should I be monitoring for that? And, there's the two things that I always talk about being connected here are sort of change and why. And so, if you should pay attention, sort of check in with yourself. I heard a guy put it really well recently, and he said, what I try to do in the morning is I just take a minute and think, how am I doing today? Mentally, physically. And he's like, how is my form? He called it, I like that a lot. What's my form today? 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. If I'm a 5 out of 10, maybe I need to, do some self-care, reach out to a friend, do something. But, be checking in with yourself, because this is unprecedented, and pay attention. Are you drinking more than you used to drink? And this could go for a friend if you notice, or more frequently, more quantity, whatever it is. Are you feeling panic attacks? Are you getting overwhelmed on a regular basis with panic and anxiety? Are you feeling more depressed? Is it getting harder to get out of bed? Is there this constant kind of sadness? Any of those can mean that, you are moving in a direction, where you're potentially at decline, in a decline, or a friend maybe. This pandemic, I always say that that the legal profession has normalized binge drinking. But this pandemic has normalized binge drinking like nothing I've ever seen. Like the Zoom happy hours every night, the quarantinis, it's great if you are using it as, a way to wind down at the end of the day and you're connecting with friends and all that. I am not against drinking. I'm just talking about paying attention to, is your drinking changing? Like, are you all day looking forward to that Zoom meeting because you want to have a drink? Or are you drinking alone when you didn't used to drink alone? And there's a real tendency to say, like I used to say, like, oh, if you had my job, you'd drink too. If you had my life, and there's a real tendency right now to say, well, in the middle of this, of course, I'm going to drink, of course. And maybe, maybe you can keep that under control. But just pay attention in case it's something not, or maybe you see that in somebody else that, that it is not the same. So if you are seeing those kinds of things, question, that's the change and the why. So are you drinking, if you're really honest with yourself, are you drinking more now because you just like drinking that much more all of a sudden? Or I used to say, like, with people in law firms, like, are you going to the bar 5 nights a week when you used to go 2? Are you, when you used to have 2 drinks, are you having 4? And if so, notice, just like pay attention, notice the change, and then ask yourself why. What is the intent? Is it that you're really just unwinding, or is it that, I've been feeling really anxious all day and I can't, I'm not going to be able to go to bed if I don't have a couple of drinks. And that might be an indicator. So, and I always say, like, we use alcohol and we're normalizing alcohol as sort of help us with our problems. But I was told very early in recovery that if I have 10 problems and I pick up a drink, I have 11 problems. So it's not actually going to solve anything. Like, that same situation is going to be there tomorrow. That is part of, it's one of those things that's easy to forget in that lens. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of the basics in the toolkit. I talked about a few things on generally on mental health in the legal, or not just in the legal profession, but for all of us during this pandemic. But what is like the regular kind of things if you're not struggling with an issue, you're just trying to stay mentally healthy. You're saying your form is good, you're getting up in the morning, good form. And so now you want to say, what should I be doing to maintain? There's some very basic things, right? So nutrition is hugely important, trying to eat well. Exercise is hugely important too. I know it's hard now, and you can't go to the gym. Some places it's really tough to walk. But exercise does release endorphins, and it does help your brain chemistry. And it also there is something of an empowering feeling in just like getting out and being, doing something. That is one thing you can control among many that you can. Sleep. It's really important to remember that stress and all this anxiety and all the things that are going on right now, they take a physical toll on our body, and our bodies need more sleep a lot of times than others. So if you need to take a nap, take a nap. I do it all the time. Napping is one of my favorite forms of taking care of myself. And you might be feeling more tired lately, and that is not unusual given these circumstances. I'm going to talk a little bit about meditation. I know that it's not, so many people feel like, oh, I can't meditate. My mind's too crazy. I can't meditate. And I've definitely always been one of those people. And I'm going to tell you right now, like, I am not perfect at this by far. I will go weeks without meditating, and then maybe I'll have a good few days, and then I go weeks again. And so one thing that I think is helpful that I could give a tip is checking out a book called, it's called Don't Just Sit There. It's by a woman named Viet Simkin. And what it is it teaches meditation in a way that it's not just about, okay, I'm going to sit quiet for 30 minutes, or 10 minutes or 3 minutes, and then I'm going to go about my day. It gives you actual tools to bring into your life to use that meditation, to actually put them into play in circumstances where where you may really need it. So, and there have been these studies that show that by bringing yourself into the present, which is what you do when you meditate, and just paying attention to your breath, that is something that is valuable to call on when you are in, feeling stressed. So for example, I mentioned how, with all this uncertainty, we tend to spin out and go to maybe a worst case scenario. With me, what if I never get to see my mom? God forbid, what happens if, something happens and I can't get back to her, I can't see her. If I start spitting out all these what if worst case scenarios, it helps to be able to you don't have to formally meditate, but just to like bring yourself back into the moment and say, wait, let me stop here. What's happening right now? Where am I? Right? Well, where am I? I'm sitting in, a beautiful home that Linda found for us in Del Mar. I have 2 feet on the ground. I am sober. I am, I have food. I have, I have a community. Everything is okay. We talk a lot about, one of the things that fear can be is forgetting everything is all right. At the end of the day, where you are right now, it's all right. And those things that you're thinking about and that you're spinning out on, what if this and what if that, there's no basis, in fact, to believe any of that. And the time that I spend spinning out on that is wasted. It hasn't changed anything. And it's certainly not time spent, that's going to come up with some sort of strategy so I can control it. I can't. I need to let go of that, and I need to control the things that I can. So that was meditation. We talked a little bit about accepting the uncertainty. And part of that, I think, is also recognizing that it's okay to not be as productive as you normally are at this time. There's too much going on. We've never been in this situation before. You can't expect yourself to be as productive as, you would be in normal times. So for instance, sometimes I've heard people say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Tomorrow I'm going to get up and meditate, and I'm going to go for a walk. Then I'm going to do work. I work for a few hours, and then I'm going to bake some sourdough bread, and I'm going to do all these things. And the day unfolds, and that person has done their work. And, maybe one other thing, maybe not. You have to let that go and say, that's okay. That's good enough. There is no perfect in a pandemic. So really being able to accept the fact that it's just not a time for productivity. Like you can't you're not going to be as productive as you would have in normal times. So that's something. And then I want to talk a little bit about what I call radical self-care, and what we in She Recovers call radical self-care. We are surrounded by so many people right now who have so many things happening in all different areas, and there's a ton of demands on our time. We're trying to find new ways of balancing home and work and all these other things. We can easily get pulled in and forget, that we have to take care of ourselves as well. And the analogy I like to use is that it's like when you get on an airplane and they tell you at the beginning, if there's a loss in cabin pressure, the masks are going to drop, but to please put your mask on before you can help another person. That's what this is here. That's what self-care is. If you don't care for yourself in this, you're not going to be a person capable of showing up for all these other things, and helping somebody else. So think of it as your own oxygen mask, and it is not selfish to put your own oxygen mask on. It's what you need to do. And there are different ways of doing that. One thing that I've really seen come to the fore, especially with all of the things going on now, is that, boundaries are gone, right? It's not like you go into work and then you leave work and go home and now you're in your home mode. Everything is one big work and home day, or everything is somehow otherwise upside down. And boundaries are basically steps that you take, rules that you take that you will not allow to be crossed, right? So it is a way to keep yourself protected from the kinds of things that you yourself have not decided you need to prioritize. The way I like to put that is to say that it's important to remember that no is a complete sentence. And maybe it's a little bit nicer with no, I can't, or no, thank you. But it's okay to say no to, your favorite exercise teacher is doing her video class, and, that was a time that you were maybe gonna be doing something else, or maybe not. Maybe you just needed a break. It's okay to say no. No, thank you. Nobody's going to protect you except you. And so that's why you are the one who has to set these boundaries. And that is a very important piece of self-care. You can't be everything to everyone all the time in this situation. And another kind of self-care that you might consider doing too is trying something new. So I can tell you, for me, a lot of us have more time or different time or things like that. I actually decided I would try to cook. I got an Instapot. It went okay the first time. I haven't been back, but I was like, oh, I'll try that. This is a good time to do that. We're going to be cooking. We're going to be at home. We're going to whatever. We'll cook, because normally I was traveling all the time, and now I'm not traveling. So, and so I gave it a shot, and I found I love it, and that's okay. I don't have to love it. I can decide I'll use the Instapot if the spirit moves me. But trying something new, that could be a different kind of exercise. That's another one for me. I used to be very regimented about what I did that was really work out. And I just lost, the ability to do that the way I used to with what's going on. And I was like, I'm just going to start walking around the neighborhood. I'm just going to start walking. And now I do these walks. Like, I was never somebody who went out for a walk. And I always hated exercise. But now I'm finding I actually really like these walks. So it's like, who knew? We don't know what we're going to find. But there are things that we can experiment with that we might not otherwise have been able to do it. And if you try meditation and you hate it, drop it. Like, it's okay to try different things on at this time. When we're thinking about fear and worrying about what comes next, I think it's really important for you to remember to draw on your inner strengths. Don't draw on, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not this. I can't make it. I can't do this. It is much more about saying, okay, this is a set of adversities we're dealing with right now, and let me reach back. I'm sure everybody has at some point dealt with some sort of adversity in a different context. what strengths did you have that you brought to bear in that context, right? Was it, for me, one of the most difficult thing I dealt with was the loss of my dad. And I was with him for the 5.5 weeks between when he got diagnosed and when he died. And so I am trying to draw on that. Like, what was I like in that time? I feel like I did a good job. That was a challenge. I feel like I did a good job. What did I have there? I had compassion. I listened. I was willing to, to do things that I never thought I would need to do to be of service to him. There are strengths that we all have. Think about your resiliency. Think about things you've gotten through in the past. You will get through this. We will get through this. And it will pass. And you can do this, based on what you've done before. Make sure you have your circle of people you can lean on. It's really important to have somebody to be able to lean on, whether it's, in a big message or in a big meeting or just, one-on-one of friends. Just keep in touch. And, one of the things, one of the most effective ways I think, of dealing with this situation that I have found too, is being of service, helping somebody else, right? That we so can't control things, but it is amazing when we help somebody else, how good it makes us feel, how we feel like we've accomplished something, and that we've done something for someone else. And there are a whole variety of ways to do service for others if you have the ability. And, it is something that is rewarding, and that frankly, it's funny, when I went into recovery, in 12-step, you have a sponsor, which is a person who tells you, basically what kind of helping you through, guiding you through. And I would spend hours on the phone with her talking about the struggles I was having and all of that. And I'm like, so sorry to take up your time. And she would say, no, you don't understand. This helps me more than it helps you. And now on the other side of that, as I sponsor other women, I realize that listening to them, getting out of my own head when my own head is a bad neighborhood, because it's just like going off in stressed out and spinning scenarios direction, getting out of my head, calling someone else and letting them talk and hearing what's going on with someone else is a great way to, stop that cycle of that kind of thinking, which can be really, really destructive. Okay, I know we are getting low on time. And so really, just to conclude before we do questions, be gentle with yourself. Practice that radical empathy. Check in with the person you think is healthiest right now and see how they're doing. Sometimes it's your healthiest friend that is struggling. And, be there for what comes next. Whatever it is, it's going to be okay. You will, you've gotten through things before, you will get through this, and you never have to do it alone. So if there are any questions about how to connect with other people or things like that, please just let me know. And with that, I will turn it over to questions.
Lisa, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for all the information. If I can ask the first question, actually for myself, like a lot of my friends refer me as California sunshine. And during this COVID-19, I mean, there have been days I just feel like I just want to cry, but
Yes.
I couldn't cry. And I don't know why, I don't know why I need to cry. And then, it's so helpless. And I'm like, even this morning, I'm like, maybe if I can cry, that's going to help me, but I couldn't. So
Yeah.
I'm just like, what is the problem? The business is okay. I don't have any financial stress. And, it's like, my gosh, so what is it? And you were saying about radical self-care. And I was thinking, I used to go morning left swimming every morning, not every morning, almost every morning. And I couldn't do that. I've not been swimming for 3 months. So, like what would be, and then I used to just fly, if I want to fly to somewhere, I'm flying. And I have not flown middle of February. I'm like usually go to see your mom, every month or very so often.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even see my parents. So my question is, what would be the best way to center ourselves when we wake up in the morning? Like, what's the best mentally to go through in the morning to center, and then so to have the the best productive, positive day?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think a lot, I think like you have a lot in your story, similar to mine, of grief, right? Look what you are, so social. You're flying all over, you're having lunch, you're having dinner, you're with people, you're a real people person. And this is, you know, that whole way of life right now is not accessible. It will be again. But right now it's not. And, you know, I think it is okay, first of all, as I've said, like to not feel okay and not be able to put your finger on why, right? This is just like a totally different thing. But when I get up in the morning as a sober person, the first thing I do is say to the universe, thank you. It's just like, I didn't drink last night. Oh my God, thank you. I still say that 16 years later. But waking up, in gratitude and thinking, like a lot of people get really sort of set for the day, whether they're in a good mood when they wake up, whether they're in a bad mood, by writing down 3 things they're grateful for, or just running in their head 3 things they're grateful for. A practice of gratitude is a good way to set your brain for the day, because then you're, you know, it's easier to not fall directly into, you know, sort of the sadness, the but this, but that. And, you know, sometimes there are things I don't, you know, I read certain meditations in the morning, which are just sort of like for women, like sayings and things, just to kind of, you know, get centered and say, okay, just be with yourself for a minute. Think about where you are. Remember, and it goes back to that whole idea of, you know, where am I right now? I'm sitting here in Del Mar and blah, blah, blah. It's like the question always to ask is, where are your feet? Right? And so if you wake up in the morning, you go, where are your feet? Here I am in San Diego. I'm healthy. I've got security. I've got all this, it's going to be okay. And, you know, you can do that thing thinking about like, what's my form? How am I feeling today? And if you're feeling not good, if you're having that feeling like, oh, no, I feel like I want to cry and I can't cry, reach out. You can always call me. Reach out for sure to somebody. Or, you know, think about, what are you going to do nice for yourself today? What are you going to do to take care of you today? And I'm telling you, like, I'm huge bubble bath, a nap, just permission, because we're so go. Permission to, you know, watch Tiger King on Netflix, you know, whatever it is, to give ourselves permission, because we are entitled to it and it's okay. And, you know, if you're still having a bad day, just, you know, kind of get out of your head with somebody else, you know, listen or do something that is of service to somebody else. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, it does. It does. Another quick question, if I can ask, if someone is in addiction, like,
Mhm.
you know, drug, could be alcohol, could be food or whatever. I mean, at this time, I mean, I know you have been successful recover, and now you are speaking publicly about it, you know, all this and sharing your experience. What do you recommend people who have those issues? What would be the best thing to move forward? I mean, to, you know, recover, basically.
Yeah, there are a number of options. It depends if somebody is thinking about, okay, I'm struggling and I need some help. I mean, the first place I would, where I was, you know, suggested that I go and that I've gone always, is there's 12-step meetings, whether it's AA, NA, Narcotics Anonymous. There's GA, Gamblers. Gambling is a huge problem right now because people are online on their computers all the time. There's Debtors Anonymous. People are spending money like crazy in online shopping because they're sitting home. And so there are 12-step groups to get connected if they're willing to do that kind of thing. If they're thinking, I really want to get away from this behavior or this substance entirely, then I suggest a 12-step. There are other avenues. I would suggest, first and foremost, if it's possible for them, and it's not always possible for everybody, to reach out to a therapist and talk to a therapist about what it is, because you may think it's one thing, but it's really, you know, maybe that combined with something else, or maybe it's, you know, a bit of something else entirely. And a therapist can really help if you have access, and it's all confidential. And if you want to, there are also programs like, there's something called Smart Recovery, SMART, that, and all of these have online meetings that are that are available. And I think part of SMART is about harm reduction. So it's not necessarily, you know, maybe you think, oh, I've been drinking too much and I want to cut back, as opposed to I want to stop entirely. Another one of those SMART programs might work. You know, I will always recommend to women, She Recovers, the organization that I work with. We do 2 free online Zoom meetings every day, facilitated by She Recover coaches who volunteer to do it. And they're at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific time each day. And you don't have to show up as yourself. You can just, you know, lurk, or you can show up as yourself. And it's on the principle that we are all recovering from something, right? So it's not about substance abuse. It's not about identifying as an alcoholic or anything like that. It is for anyone who identifies themselves as in some kind of recovery. And that can mean from a physical issue, from, you know, there are women recovering from cancer in that group. There are people in grief that are in recovery from grief, workaholism, perfectionism, all kinds of, you know, substance use and mental health, any kind of trauma. There's a lot of trauma-informed stuff in there. And that is a safe space. So there's a lot of places to start. The best, I think, you know, that if possible, that I would recommend is talk to a therapist.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Deanna?
We've got a Facebook question. It says, I think about this for my 34-year-old single daughter that feels isolated. How do I encourage without sounding mothering?
You can, you know, I could send you, like, you could actually, one way to do it, and I know because, you know, when I was struggling, if someone had said to me, Lisa, I think, you know, you're drinking too much, you really should cut down, you got a problem, I would make some excuse and I would just cut that person further out. It's important to approach it because you don't know what you're going to get. It may lead to your daughter saying, I'm so glad you asked. I want to talk about this. Thank you. I haven't been feeling good. You don't know what the reaction is going to be. It could go either way. But at a minimum, what you're going to get is you will have planted a seed in her head. And the way I would approach it is not, you know, about like, I'm worried you're drinking too much. It's much more like, you know, you don't seem yourself. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. You've been isolated so long. Are you okay? The power of the question, are you okay, can never be underestimated. And I think it's really important to, you know, be willing to have that conversation. And if someone had said to me, you know, you don't seem yourself, Lisa, are you okay? You seem like you're working from home a lot. You just don't. If you notice somebody is, you know, there's a weight gain, weight loss, change in appearance, you know, they're not as responsive as they used to be, or they're missing meetings, or they're doing, these are all things to say, you don't seem yourself lately. Are you okay? The other thing that could be more direct would be to say, I sat in on this wellness program on Wednesday, you know, on Wednesday night, and there are these meetings for all women in dealing with all kinds of issues, because it's not just that, and maybe suggest doing a She Recovers thing. And that's a very sort of non-threatening forum, because it's not saying you have an alcohol problem and you have to stop. But, you know, I think you do, you know, you could be very surprised that when you say just, are you okay? I'm worried you don't seem yourself, that a lot may come out. And if it doesn't, the seed will be planted in her head, if she's in any kind of denial or something like that, of, oh, I thought I look, you know, totally normal to the world. Maybe I don't. Like, that's what would have happened to me if somebody had said, you know, you don't seem yourself, are you okay? I would have been like, oh, you know, I think I go out the door fine every day. Maybe it's not. So it's really important to do. It's well worth doing. And she's lucky to have a mother who wants to do that and cares about her like that. So good on you.
Another question. What is the best way to help a friend or family member realize that they have a substance abuse problem?
It's very tough to realize it if they're in deep denial. Again, that whole "are you okay" is really good. And it depends on the problem and the person, but there are certain things that you can do that sort of set boundaries around, you know, certain things start happening that can be addressed sort of like I know I know people who have had this with a child, and, you know, they've sort of said, listen, we're not comfortable with how you are with drinking in the house, so we're not going to drink when you're here. Or, you know, those kinds of things. Or if there are specific incidents and you really do worry that there is, you know, a danger to that person, you can certainly talk to them about it directly and say, this made me really concerned. Is there something, you know, that should we talk about this? The least confrontational, it tends to be good. And again, it plants that seed. It is a hard thing to get that person to say, you're right, okay, and I'm going to do something about it. But as you go along, if you're expressing concern about how they are and letting them know that you're worried, the other thing, if you feel like it needs to be a more direct conversation, there are people who can look at organizations like NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness, which is not a great name for it, but it's the biggest organization that will help sort of coach you. You could talk to somebody there and explain the circumstances, and then sort of get coached through how you might have a conversation.
And then what is the best thing someone said to you after you told them about your diagnosis of alcoholism or depression? You know.
Yeah, the best thing that was said, well, one of my friends said, oh, thank God. She lived in another state, and she had been sort of hearing me tell stories and had been worried. So that was pretty good. But I think the best thing was when my dad said to me, you know, I called them that morning that I was checking into detox, and I said, listen, sit down. I have a problem. I haven't talked to you about it, but I'm having a problem with alcohol. I didn't tell them about the drugs. And I said, I'm going into a detox unit at a hospital to get a detox. You know, my mother flipped out and was like, what do you mean? You got to be hospitalized for that? We know you drink too much, but you got to be hospitalized? And I was like, yeah, I got to be hospitalized. And then my dad got on the phone and he just said, what? We got a problem? Okay, we'll take care of it. That's good. We'll be in. Like, that's it. You know, very much like that. And I have to say that when people tell me that my book helped them or something that I said helped them, that is the best. And when the people at my firm let me go run around and talk all over the place, even though I was still working at my firm, you know, and they said, we're really proud of you. Those are all big deals. Like, you get to be proud in recovery in a way that, you know, when my dad got sick, if I had still been drinking, I would have been like, you know, instead of going home and throwing the air mattress on the ground and moving in for 5.5 weeks, I would have been sitting on a bar stool complaining about the fact that my dad was sick. You know, it gives you this whole different life. When I was drinking, I would sit on bar stools and be like, I'm going to write a book, you know, and then I got sober and I wrote a book. So, you know, there is so much on the other side.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no more questions.
Yeah. Lisa, thank you so much for your time. I mean, so much great information. Definitely will have to come back. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I know we run about 9 minutes over, but it's great information. So thank you.
Great. And please feel free to reach out to me if there's ever anything I can do.
Wonderful. And we have this recorded, so is it okay to share?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Okay,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
Bye-bye. Okay, bye-bye.